In this video, we're going to explore a second example of ways to find all the possible zeros of a polynomial function. So in this second example, we're given p of x is equal to x cubed plus 2x squared minus 16. Since we're asked to find all real and imaginary zeros, this means that we really want to solve where this function equals 0. So let's take a look at this function just a little bit more closely. And we want to use all the tools that we have had previously, but we find here that they just don't work. And so if you can't solve by factoring, we want to use the rational root theorem. And this theorem says that all the possible zeros are found by dividing all the factors of the constant term in the polynomial by all the factors of the leading coefficient. So we kind of remember that as asking ourselves to find our p's and q's, where p is the factor of all the constant terms and q are the factors of the leading coefficient. So in this particular case then, what that comes down to is p is going to equal all the factors of negative 16 and q is going to equal all the factors of 1. So all the factors of negative 16 could be positive or negative 1, 2, 4, 8, or 16, and notice they're all plus or minus. And then for 1, we know that that's just plus or minus 1. So we want to divide our p by q, and that will, in this case, still give us just plus or minus all the values in the numerator, but had our factors of q been more than just 1, we'd end up with a number of fractions. Then, based on all of these, we're going to use the test and check method in order to figure out if synthetic division will give us 0. So when I test my first example, number 1, in number 1, I get a remainder of negative 13, which is not 0. If I test the possible 0 of 2, and in this particular case, I get a remainder of 0. And if I get a remainder of 0, then that tells me that x minus that number that I put out front, so x minus 2 is a factor. And then based on what I'm left with, I have x squared x squared plus 4x plus 8. So these two factors are going to lead to what my zeros are, because I'm going to set each factor equal to 0. Well, x squared plus 4x plus 8, ideally I'd like to be able to factor that further, but since there aren't any values that multiply to give me 8 that add to 4, I'm going to have to use the quadratic formula. We've had plenty of practice using the quadratic formula, and so if you do that, your result should be negative 2 plus or minus 2i. And then from my other factor, I see that x is going to equal just 2. So my zeros are going to then be 2, negative 2 plus 2i, and negative 2 minus 2i. And I see that I get 3 zeros, which matches with my degree of 3. And so I can mentally say that this makes sense to me, and that I have a better sense that I have the correct answer, or at least the correct number of roots.